They banned me from the military base I once bled for, called me a threat, a disgrace, a relic of the past. But 7 minutes later, a 4-star general showed up on my front lawn with a convoy of soldiers and a truth too powerful to silence. This isn't just my story. It's the story of every forgotten veteran, every buried lie, and what happens when one old soldier dares to fight back against the system that erased him. They didn't even bother to look me in the eye when they said it. "Sir, you're no longer authorized to enter this base. Please turn around." The words dropped like grenades, casual, cold, destructive. I stood there, stunned. My boots, those same ones that had marched through sandstorms in Fallujah and trudged through mud in Kandahar, now anchored me uselessly to the asphalt outside the Fort Miles military gate. The young MP, barely old enough to remember 9/11, kept one hand resting on the butt of his holstered sidearm like I was a threat. And behind him stood a man I remembered all too well. Major Curtis Vance. Pristine uniform. Medals that gleamed like accusations. And that smirk. That familiar poisonous smirk that had once sent men to die for his ambition. I wasn't welcome here, not anymore. And all because of a letter. A damn letter I wrote to the families of the 3 soldiers we lost under Vance's reckless command 14 years ago. The truth hurts, but apparently it offends even more. They didn't know I was coming to visit Sergeant Thompson's widow, just wanted to bring her the dog tags her son mailed me for safekeeping after her passing. They didn't know that this was my last stop before moving out of state to be closer to my daughter. All they saw was an old soldier trying to relive a past that made them uncomfortable. But I wasn't here for nostalgia. I was here for honor. I am William Bill Carter. Retired Staff Sergeant, United States Army. 65 years old. Widowed, Purple Heart. 3 tours. I live alone in a small, creaky house on the edge of town. The kind of place where the mailbox rusts faster than the flowers bloom, and neighbors wave more out of habit than genuine warmth. My days are quiet, fixing radios, feeding the birds, and spending evenings polishing the folded flag that once draped over my wife's coffin. I don't ask for much from the world anymore. But I do expect a little decency. When the baseband arrived in the mail stamped with Vance's signature, it felt like being court-martialed without a trial. You've been deemed disruptive to military order and morale. Morale. I carried men with their legs blown off to medevacs. I've written eulogies to mothers who never stopped crying. And now I was being told I was a threat to morale. I didn't tell anyone. Not even my daughter Mia, who'd moved to Seattle years ago and still left voicemails every Sunday like I was listening. Instead, I folded that letter, slid it under the flag on my mantel, and tried to forget. But some ghosts refused to stay buried. That evening, I took a long walk through town. Past the diner where the waitresses still called me Hon, past the VFW hall where I no longer felt like I belonged. It was getting harder to breathe, and then came the knock. Not a gentle one. 3 sharp raps. Military rhythm. I opened the door expecting a neighbor or maybe a Jehovah's Witness. But what I saw, I'll never forget. Black SUVs lined my quiet street. A convoy. American flags fluttered on antennae. Soldiers, real ones with worn boots and silver hair, stood in formation across my lawn, and leading them, 4-star General Elias Monroe, his face, though older, and lined with the weight of wars fought on and off the battlefield, broke into a soft, almost boyish smile when he saw me. Staff Sergeant Carter. He saluted, his voice rich with respect. "Permission to enter, sir." I was frozen. "What is this?" I croaked. He stepped forward, offering his hand. "This is a long overdue thank you. I hadn't seen Monroe in nearly 20 years. He'd been a fresh colonel back then, one of the few officers who still walked into the mud with enlisted men. He remembered birthdays. He wrote condolence letters himself by hand. And, most importantly, he listened. He stepped into my living room, looked around at the medals, the photo of my late wife, and then pulled a small folder from his chest pocket. Inside was a printed transcript of my letter. "You spoke the truth, Bill," he said quietly. "And for that, Vance tried to bury you." He looked out the window at his convoy. But not all of us forgot. Not all of us were afraid. I was shaking now. General Monroe turned to me, his voice sharp. "I am here to reinstate your base access. Not just that, but to give you something the system never did. Recognition." From his coat he withdrew a medal I never expected to see, the Distinguished Service Cross. My knees gave out before I could take it. We sat together that night. Me, Monroe, and half a dozen old soldiers who had driven across the state just to be here. Some I knew, some I didn't. But every one of them saluted like I was still part of their unit, like I hadn't been cast aside and forgotten. They listened as I told them about the letter, about the ban, about the ache that never left my chest since the war and since my wife passed. And they didn't interrupt. No one judged. No one looked away. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like a relic. I felt like a man. But deep down, something still itched. This wasn't just about me. Curtis Vance was still in power, still rewriting history, still making sure anyone who questioned him disappeared into footnotes. And now, I had an army again. I didn't sleep that night. The Distinguished Service Cross sat on my kitchen table gleaming under the dim overhead light untouched. It didn't feel like mine. Not yet. Not when the man who got my access revoked was still signing off on the fates of young men like he hadn't ever sent us into that ambush in 2010. I sat at the window, sipping lukewarm coffee, watching General Monroe and the rest of the convoy quietly rest outside. Their vehicles idled in respectful silence like tombstones lined up under the stars. No noise, no chaos, just a silent message to the neighborhood. This man matters. I never wanted revenge. What I wanted was justice. But those two often walked the same road. In the early morning, Monroe stepped onto my porch. He wasn't wearing his cap anymore. Just a gray t-shirt that revealed an old bullet scar on his upper arm. He sat across from me nursing a black coffee with no cream, no sugar, same as always. "I need you to tell me everything, Bill," he said softly. "No one else has. Everyone else either got paid off or shut up." I pulled the old letter out from beneath the flag on my mantel. The paper had yellowed around the edges, the ink faded in places. But the words still stung like they had the day I wrote them. "Dear Mrs. Thompson, your son didn't die from enemy fire. He died because Major Curtis Vance refused to call off a recon mission he knew was compromised." I read it aloud, every word, how we begged Vance not to send us out, how the intel was clearly outdated, how the village was no longer neutral, how the comms blackout was intentional, how Vance used us as bait, trying to draw out insurgents for a flashy capture that never came. We walked into a slaughter, and 3 never walked out. I had carried Thompson's body on my back for 2 kilometers under enemy fire just to get him to the bird. He bled out before we landed, and Vance, he got a promotion. Monroe's knuckles whitened as I read. He didn't interrupt, but I saw the fire building in his eyes. "He put you on a blacklist for that letter," he asked, voice low. "Banned me from every military base in the country," I replied. "Sent a quiet memo claiming I was mentally unstable, a threat to morale. said I'd shown insubordination and signs of PTSD aggression. Monroe didn't speak for a long while. Finally, he said, "I'm going to take this to the Secretary of the Army." I chuckled. "You think a folder and a good heart can undo what Vance has webbed into place for a decade?" "No," Monroe replied, setting down his mug with precision. "But we're not just bringing a folder." He turned his phone toward me. On it were video calls lined up retired colonels' journalists, a few familiar names from Capitol Hill. "I've been waiting for someone like you to speak up, Bill. Someone who was there. Someone they didn't buy." He paused, his voice steel. "You ready to burn it down?" I hesitated, then nodded. We began gathering names. I reached out to the families, those who had written to me after the letter went semi-public online for about 3 hours before it was pulled. Families who had lost sons and daughters under Vance's command. Monroe reached out to reporters who had tried unsuccessfully to publish the truth. The Freedom of Information Act had been stonewalled. Internal investigations found no misconduct. But now, we had real testimony, documents, witnesses, and then came the twist I didn't expect. Jason Rudd, a name I hadn't heard in years. Once a young medic in my squad, Jason was presumed KIA in that same ambush, but he wasn't. He had survived shrapnel to the jaw, a blown-out eardrum, and a traumatic brain injury. Medically discharged. Silenced with a confidentiality clause and a fat retirement package. Until Monroe found him. Jason showed up at my door 2 days later, limping with a cane beard to his chest. His eyes held ghosts, but he hugged me like I was the last thing tethering him to sanity. "They lied to my mom, Bill," he whispered. "Told her I volunteered, that I said I was eager to lead." He pulled a small voice recorder from his jacket. "This is the mission briefing," he said. I recorded it, just in case. My hands trembled as I pressed play. There it was. Curtis Vance, clearly agitated. "I don't give a damn what recon says. We're going in. I want results by dawn." Another voice, my own, interrupted him. "Sir, the satellite feed is 5 days old. The village has changed hands. That's not intel, that's suicide." I said, "We're going in." "That's an order, Staff Sergeant." Jason paused the recording. They tried to destroy everything he said. But I kept this. I knew one day it'd matter. It did. Word began to spread. VFW members started showing up at my lawn like pilgrims. Vietnam vets, Gulf War survivors, even young post-9/11 soldiers, all wearing hats and patches. One carried a sign, "You can't silence the truth forever." Neighbors peeked out from behind curtains. Some brought casseroles, others brought whiskey. The quiet old man who lived alone. He had become something else, a symbol. But symbols are dangerous. 3 days later, I came home from the pharmacy to find my windows shattered. Graffiti sprayed across my garage, "Traitor." My flagpole had been snapped in two. It hurt more than I expected. Not the broken glass, but the message. There were still people, still systems, trying to erase me. That night, Monroe sat beside me silently as I swept the glass from the porch. "We expected this," he said. "I know," I said, "but damn, it still stings." He placed a call that night, and the next morning something extraordinary happened. At precisely 8:00 a.m., 5 military Humvees, a press van, and 2 blacked-out sedans rolled down my block. Inside were veterans journalists, a civil rights attorney, and a retired JAG officer. This wasn't just a support mission anymore. It was a tribunal. They set up shop in my garage. Whiteboards, folders, statements, media briefings. We were no longer whispering in shadows. We were preparing to speak in front of the entire country. The garage smelled like dust and motor oil, but that morning it felt more like a war room. The walls were lined with taped-up photos maps, timelines like some old detective's board from a crime thriller. And in the center of it all, under the harsh glow of a single light bulb, sat my old dining table, now repurposed as the hub of a movement. I never imagined my house would become the headquarters of a full-scale takedown, but here we were. Jason Rudd sat across from me quietly, reviewing his handwritten testimony. His hands shook, but his eyes were locked in, focused, ready. Monroe paced the room, barking updates on calls with lawyers, senators, old war buddies who now wore suits in Washington. "We've got less than 48 hours, Monroe said. "If we're going to strike, it has to be now before Vance hears what's coming." I nodded. There was no turning back. I stepped outside for air, and that's when I saw them. Cars lining the entire street. Dozens of people standing silently in front of my yard. Neighbors, strangers, veterans, journalists, mothers in church dresses, teenagers holding flags. Someone had printed out copies of my letter and passed it around like gospel. A little girl stood barefoot on the sidewalk, holding it in both hands like it was the Constitution. That broke me. Right there on the porch, I sank to my knees and wept. By noon, the press was broadcasting from my driveway. CNN, Reuters, even local stations that hadn't cared about a war veteran in 20 years now suddenly couldn't stop filming. They shoved microphones in my face, but I didn't flinch. I read the letter aloud again, this time into a dozen cameras. Jason's recording was played for a stunned crowd, the audio cutting through the hot afternoon air like gunfire. "I don't care what recon says. We're going in. I want results by dawn." Gasps, hands over mouths. People started crying, not out of sadness, but because they finally saw what had been buried for too long. That night I received a call. Blocked number. I almost didn't answer, but something told me to. "Bill," the voice rasped. "This is Curtis Vance." I didn't respond. "You need to stop. You have no idea what you're stepping into." I stood there, silent, listening to the cowardice behind the authority. "You think you're the hero here," he barked. "You think your little sob story will matter when this goes to the Pentagon." Still, I said nothing. I made the decisions I had to make. I was following the mission. Then came the worst part. You were always weak. That's why you were enlisted. You followed. You didn't lead. I didn't hang up. I just laid the phone gently on the porch railing and let him talk into the void until he realized I was no longer listening. Then I turned around and faced the people. The next morning, Monroe held a press conference on my front lawn. The atmosphere was electric. Fold-out chairs for the media, an American flag draped behind him. Uniformed veterans flanking both sides like sentinels. He spoke plainly, powerfully. "I'm here not just as a general," he said. "I'm here as a witness, as someone who's tired of silence." Curtis Vance manipulated endangered and discarded honorable soldiers for personal gain. He paused, then stepped aside. "Staff Sergeant Carter has something to say." I limped up to the microphone. My heart thundered in my chest. I didn't ask for this fight I began, but I'll finish it. I pulled out the broken flagpole snapped in half during the vandalism. I held it high. This flag was torn down from my house, but they didn't understand something. I planted the broken pole into the grass beside me. You can snap a pole, but you can't break the man who swore to protect it. Cheers erupted. A chant began. "Carter, Carter, Carter." I wanted to disappear into the ground, but Monroe whispered, "Stand tall, soldier." By sundown, the military was already scrambling. A formal inquiry was opened into Curtis Vance's conduct. Whistleblower protection was granted to me and Jason. Congress requested transcripts. Media began demanding archived mission logs, and in the chaos, more witnesses came forward. Medics, tech officers, one drone pilot who had seen the real-time feed of the ambush and logged a warning deleted days later. Curtis Vance tried to hide behind titles, but truth doesn't need a uniform to march. The next twist came fast. A retired senator contacted Monroe. He had overseen defense appropriations during the war, and he had a secret one he had buried deep out of fear, shame, and pressure. He knew about Vance's falsified commendations, the staged photo ops, the doctored reports. He had even signed off on some of them. Now he wanted redemption. He sent us a briefcase full of documents, official memos, communications scrubbed from the record, photographs, proof. It was enough to take the case straight to the Department of Defense Inspector General. That night, someone tried to break into my house. Jason and I heard the window shatter and rushed downstairs. But we weren't alone. Half the convoy had taken shifts sleeping in their trucks. Within seconds, 3 soldiers tackled the masked man before he could even reach the back door. Turns out he wasn't just some thug. He was military police, sent under the radar. But Monroe made sure he was arrested by local sheriffs instead of buried by internal affairs. This had stopped being a drama. It had become a war of narratives. And we had the one weapon they didn't, the truth. The next morning the call came. From the Pentagon, an emergency hearing had been called, and I was invited to testify. The sun hadn't yet risen when the military van pulled up outside my house. It was dark, silent, purposeful, like every mission briefing I'd ever received before combat. But this time I wasn't carrying a rifle, just a worn leather folder filled with truth. I had never been to the Pentagon before. I always thought if I did go, it would be to receive something posthumously for someone else. Not like this. Not to testify. Not to bury a general. Inside the van, Monroe sat beside me in full dress uniform, every button and ribbon polished with the kind of reverence soldiers gave to fallen friends. He didn't speak much. Neither did I. But at one point, he placed a firm hand on my shoulder and said, "You were born for this moment. Not for war, but for justice." I looked out the window at the passing trees and empty roads. "I just wanted peace," I whispered. "And this is how we make it," he replied. The Pentagon was colder than I imagined, sterile, intimidating, yet somehow hollow. They escorted us through corridors of beige walls and security checkpoints. Every guard we passed stood at attention for Monroe. A few looked at me and blinked with recognition. Maybe they'd seen the broadcast. Maybe they were just told who I was. But for the first time in a long time, I walked like a soldier again. Back straight, head high. The tribunal chamber was a rectangular room with dark wood walls and a long semicircle table of 7 uniformed members of the Joint Review Council. Behind me sat a crowd of observers, journalists, family members, servicemen, congressional aides, and Curtis Vance. He sat opposite me, flanked by his legal counsel. He didn't look at me at first. But when he finally did, I saw it, the panic behind the practiced stoicism, the trembling jawline, the eyes scanning the room for allies that no longer stood beside him. He knew. His empire was crumbling. The lead officer, a 3-star general named Briggs, opened the proceedings. "We are here to examine a series of allegations regarding misconduct, misrepresentation, and obstruction of justice connected to military operations under Major General Curtis Vance's command from 2008 to 2013. I took my oath and began. For nearly 2 hours I read aloud my testimony, the letter, the audio tape. the mission orders. Every word was met with silence more thunderous than applause. When I recounted the moment Vance overrode the intelligence briefing, one of the tribunal officers closed his eyes and exhaled hard. When I described carrying Thompson's lifeless body for 2 kilometers under fire, a woman in the crowd, his mother, I would later learn, covered her mouth with both hands and began to weep. Then I played the recording, and Vance's voice filled the room. I don't give a damn what recon says. We're going in. I want results by dawn. When it ended, no one moved. I looked up expecting some kind of pushback. But General Briggs simply said, "Understood." "Thank you, Staff Sergeant." Vance's lawyers tried. They called the letter speculative, the audio unauthenticated, and my trauma anecdotal. But then Monroe stood, and when a 4-star general vouches for the truth, the room changes. He laid out the corroborating testimony. He presented the documents from the retired senator. He introduced the drone pilot live via satellite. He revealed records of families paid off classified reports, scrubbed promotions fast-tracked through back channels, and finally he said, Curtis Vance did not make a battlefield mistake. He engineered a cover-up and tried to silence the last honorable man who wouldn't be bought. That's when Vance finally spoke. He rose slowly, adjusting his tie like he was preparing for a speech. "There are always casualties in war," he began. I followed the mission parameters. I did what I was trained to do. "By whom?" I asked, standing. He flinched. "By whom, General?" I pressed. "The enemy or your ambition." That was the first time the gallery applauded. The hearing went into closed deliberation for an hour. I sat alone in the hallway, staring at the boots of people walking by. Jason came out of a side room and sat next to me. "You okay?" he asked. I nodded slowly. Just waiting to feel something. He reached into his coat and pulled out a folded American flag, the one that had draped his hospital bed during his recovery. "I kept this all these years," he said. "But I think it was always meant for you." I couldn't speak, so I didn't. When the tribunal reconvened, General Briggs read the findings. Curtis Vance is hereby recommended for immediate suspension, pending further investigation by military criminal authorities. Furthermore, the Department of the Army shall formally recognize Staff Sergeant William Carter's service and issue a public apology for wrongful disciplinary action taken against him. Vance didn't protest. He didn't cry. He just sat there, and for the first time I saw him not as a man with power, but as a man who had lost everything because he gambled with the lives of those he swore to lead. Outside the Pentagon, Monroe held another press briefing. This time, I stood beside him. He handed me a small black case. Inside my medal, my reinstated ID, and a formal letter of commendation. He leaned over and whispered, "Don't ever let them bury you again." I didn't say anything, but I turned to the cameras and the crowds and spoke from the heart. There are thousands like me, men and women who gave everything and came home to silence, to lies, to empty promises. Today wasn't about vengeance. It was about reclaiming our dignity. If you're out there forgotten, I see you. We see you, and we are not done yet. That speech would go viral by morning. That night I returned home. My front lawn was covered in flags. Children had drawn chalk drawings of tanks and doves and salutes across the sidewalk. A man had left a single combat boot on the porch with a note inside, for the soldier who never stopped marching. Inside my house, I placed the medal beside the old photo of my wife, and I swear I heard her whisper, "About time, Bill. It was supposed to end there." The tribunal was over. Vance was suspended. I was exonerated. The media storm had crested, and the world for a brief moment knew my name. But peace, real peace, is not just the absence of war. It's what comes after the noise dies down, and I wasn't done yet. Because for every headline about my story, there were thousands of stories still buried, still silenced. Men whose graves were unvisited. Families gaslit by medals and folded flags. And soldiers still living under cardboard roofs in alleyways that our country refused to see. So I made a choice. I wasn't going to fade away. 3 days after returning home, I took out my old duffel bag and packed it like I used to before a mission. Not with weapons, but with documents, testimonies, photos, flags, and I set off, not to fight, but to remember. I visited the families of the fallen first. Sergeant Thompson's mother welcomed me with trembling hands and eyes too tired for more tears. I gave her his dog tags and knelt beside her husband's grave. "He believed in you," she said. "No," I replied, voice cracked. "I believed in him, and I failed him." She reached out, touched my shoulder gently. "You didn't fail. You came back. Then came Arizona to see Private Lemoyne's brother, a tattooed mechanic who punched his garage wall when I read the letter aloud. He broke down when he heard the recording. They said he died protecting freedom," he growled. "Now I know what that really meant. Your brother did protect freedom," I told him. "He just never got to live in it." We hugged in silence. That night he fixed the rusted axle of my truck free of charge. In Colorado, I spoke at a veterans shelter. Most of the men had stopped believing in anything. But when I finished telling my story, one of them, missing 3 fingers and half a smile, stood up and saluted me. "I remember you," he said. "Kandahar. You pulled my buddy out of that crater." I didn't remember the face, but I remembered the weight. Word kept spreading. Videos of the tribunal were circulating. Soon, Monroe called me. "They've opened formal charges against Vance. Court-martial pending. He's facing prison." I didn't cheer. Not because I didn't want justice, but because victory over one man doesn't fix a broken system. "I want something more," I said. "What?" he asked. "A memorial," I replied. He paused. "For the fallen." "No," I said. "For the silenced. For every soldier who died because someone else chased glory." And so it began. The idea was simple, a traveling wall, but not of names, of letters, printed, laminated, mounted. Letters like mine, like Jason's, like dozens I had received since the story broke. Testimonies from medics, mechanics, mothers. Words too painful for cemeteries, too raw for ceremonies. We called it the Wall of Truth. With Monroe's help and a few senators who suddenly remembered their moral compass, we secured funding. Veteran artists volunteered to design it. Families mailed us letters, photos, even dog tags to hang in the display cases. We brought it to the first base in Georgia. They tried to stop us at the gate. Monroe showed his badge, and they stood down. The first time I walked the wall, I didn't speak. I just let the words hit me. A letter from a 19-year-old private who had begged to be reassigned after seeing his commander beat an Afghan civilian. Another from a Marine who confessed to self-harming just to be discharged. A third, unsigned, "I died in 2012. My body just hasn't caught up. People didn't just cry. They knelt. Some left medals. Some left boots. One little girl left a teddy bear with a tag. For the uncle I never met. Jason walked beside me. He looked stronger now. Straighter. The cane still there, but not the tremble. "They were right to silence us," he muttered. I turned. "What do you mean?" He looked at me, and for the first time he smiled. "Because they knew we could tear it all down. We traveled for 4 months, base to base, town to town. Every stop more letters, more stories, more soldiers finally standing up, speaking out. One night in a small town in Kentucky, a young private came up to me after the event. "Sir," he said, eyes filled with hesitation, "I'm gay. My CO found out and is threatening to dishonorably discharge me. Can you help?" I didn't hesitate. "Yes," I said, "not just me. All of us." The next day, Monroe got his transfer order signed. That private now travels with us managing our press desk. He smiles a lot now, but not all stories ended with justice. One man came to the wall, read the letters, and left a note. "I wish I'd had this 10 years ago. My brother might still be here." That night I sat on the hood of my truck, looking up at the stars, wondering if the pain would ever fully leave. It doesn't, but neither does the fight. Then came the message I didn't expect. A voicemail from my daughter Mia. "Dad," she said, voice trembling. "I saw you on the news. I saw the wall. I don't know why we stopped talking. I think I blamed you for being gone so much, for missing Mom's last birthday. But now I see what you carried, and I'm proud. I want you to meet your grandson." I dropped the phone. I cried harder than I had in years, not from sorrow, but from healing. The final stop of the Wall's first tour was Washington, D.C., the lawn of the Capitol. Thousands came. Veterans stood shoulder to shoulder. Lawmakers walked in silence. Children wrote notes in chalk. And in the center, a new letter had been added. Mine. But this time, not the one I wrote in pain. A new one. "Dear America, we are not broken. We are not weak. We are the ones who bled so others wouldn't have to. We are not your ghosts, we are your mirror. And we will not go quietly." Signed, a soldier who refused to be silenced. It had been 6 months since I stood in front of that tribunal. 6 months since Vance had been suspended and the Wall of Truth began its journey across the nation. And yet it felt like the war had only just begun, not against a nation or an enemy with a flag, but against silence and memory. By now, people called me a symbol, but I was just Bill, a man with shaking hands, a healing heart, and too many ghosts to count. That morning, I was standing in my driveway polishing the nameplate on the trailer that carried the Wall. It had rained the night before, and dew still clung to the metal like sweat on a brow before a firefight. That's when Monroe pulled up. Only this time, he wasn't in uniform. He wore jeans, a flannel shirt. He looked tired. He nodded at the Wall. "She's become something, hasn't she?" "She's alive," I said quietly. "She breathes truth." Monroe didn't respond right away. He pulled a folded piece of paper from his pocket. "Bill, I need to tell you something." I took the paper. It was a subpoena. Curtis Vance's court-martial was officially set, and I was the star witness. I hadn't seen Vance in half a year. The military had kept everything quiet while the case was built. Interviews, depositions, even classified documents finally declassified under congressional pressure. But now, it was happening. Not in some backroom tribunal, but a full military court, open to the public, a trial that would be televised across the country, and suddenly the burden returned. What if I wasn't enough? What if they found a loophole? What if the system in all its gears and levers turned again to crush the truth? Monroe saw the fear on my face. "You don't have to carry this alone," he said. But I did. Because I was the one who wrote the letter. I was the one who had lived when others didn't. And because I had let myself believe I didn't matter for far too long. The night before the trial, I sat alone in the chapel down the road from my house. The walls still smelled of old wood and candle smoke. There was a framed photo of a young soldier in the hallway, Private Aaron Reed, killed in 2006. His mother still came here every Sunday. I lit a candle and whispered every name I could remember. Thompson, Lemoyne, Gomez, Walker. Tanaka, Briggs, and I asked them for strength, because tomorrow we wouldn't just be confronting a man. We'd be confronting a legacy of lies. The courtroom was packed. Journalists filled the balcony. Veterans stood in the aisles. Uniformed officers watched with stone faces. And, at the front, Curtis Vance, still defiant, still pristine, but hollow behind the eyes. They called me to the stand. I walked past him, and this time I looked straight into his face. He flinched. I sat, raised my hand, swore the oath, and I spoke. I told them everything. The mission briefing, the ignored intel, the aftermath, the silence, the ban. I played the tape again. I read from the wall. I showed photos, memos, letters from families. And then I did something unexpected. I pulled a folded sheet from my pocket and said, "This is a letter I never sent." I opened it. My voice shook. "Dear Curtis, I've hated you for so long I forgot what it felt like not to. You took something from me I can never get back, my brothers. My peace, my faith in command. But today, I refuse to carry that hate anymore, because if I keep holding it, I'm no better than the system that let you thrive. So here it is, my truth. Yours is up to you." Silence. Even the judge didn't move. I looked at Vance, and for the first time, he looked small. A man who had traded his soul for ribbons and control, and lost. The prosecution rested. Vance's defense tried to paint him as a man under pressure, a commander navigating impossible circumstances. They claimed I was traumatized, misremembering, bitter. But then Jason Rudd took the stand, and he tore the lie to shreds. He spoke with a calm strength that made the room lean in. He described the mission, the order, the scream in his comms, the sound of Thompson's last breath. He ended with, "I have a bullet still lodged near my spine because of that man's ambition." But I got to walk into this room. They didn't. He looked toward me, because Bill never let their stories die. The closing arguments came and went, and then the jury deliberated. 4 hours. We waited in silence. In the hallway, Monroe sat beside me. "You nervous?" he asked. "No," I said. "Just tired." He smiled. "You earned your rest." The verdict came in. Guilty of dereliction of duty, of falsifying reports, of obstruction. The sentence, dishonorable discharge. Loss of all benefits. Stripped of rank. 6 years confinement. It wasn't enough for some, but it was a beginning. Outside, cameras flashed like lightning. They shoved microphones at me, screaming for a statement. I held up a photo, one of my old unit. Smiling. Young. Whole. And I said, "This isn't about me. It's about them. About those we failed. And those we'll never stop fighting for." That night I went home. The house was quiet, but on my front porch was a small package. No return address. Inside a medal, the one Vance wore, and a note. "You were right. I was afraid. Now I'm just alone." I burned the medal, but kept the note. The next morning, Monroe and I hit the road. The wall had another stop to make. Seattle. To meet my grandson, and maybe, maybe finally come home. The road to Seattle was long, winding, and strangely peaceful. For the first time in years, I wasn't driving toward a battlefield, a hearing, or a funeral. I was driving toward a future I thought I'd forfeited long ago. My hands rested easy on the steering wheel. The trailer carrying the wall of truth followed behind a silent witness to everything we'd been through. In the passenger seat, Monroe dozed off, his flannel shirt unbuttoned at the collar dog tags, clinking softly against his chest. Mount Rainier appeared on the horizon, white-capped, majestic. And somewhere below that mountain my daughter was waiting, with a boy I had never met. my grandson. I didn't know what I would say, or if she would forgive me, but I was ready. We parked outside a modest craftsman home on a quiet, tree-lined street. Wind chimes danced gently in the breeze. I stood there for a long time, staring at the door, my boots suddenly heavier than ever. Then the door opened, and there she was. Mia, older now, taller, her hair pulled back in a ponytail like her mother used to wear. She didn't say anything at first. Neither did I. Then she whispered, "Hi, Dad." I nodded. Her eyes welled with tears, and before I could speak, a small figure peeked out from behind her legs. A boy, 6, maybe 7. Tan skin, messy hair, wearing a red Captain America hoodie 3 sizes too big. He looked up at me and said, "Are you the soldier from the TV?" My voice cracked. I guess I am." He nodded solemnly. "You're my grandpa." I fell to my knees, and he ran into my arms. That evening, we sat on the back porch, sipping tea under the golden light of sunset. Mia told me about her husband, gone 2 years now from cancer, about raising a boy on her own, about the years she hated me for never being around, for missing birthdays, for the silence. "I thought the army took you from us," she said. "It did," I replied, "but I let it." She looked away, then reached into her pocket and pulled out a photo. It was of me, younger, in uniform, holding her as a baby. Mom kept this in her wallet until the day she died. She said, I held the photo with shaking hands. "She believed you'd come back." I wiped my eyes. "I'm sorry it took me so long." She placed her hand over mine. "You're here now." The next morning, we brought the Wall of Truth to the Seattle War Memorial Plaza. Over 10,000 people showed up. Veterans, families, school children. It was our largest turnout yet. I walked the wall slowly, my grandson holding my hand. He stopped at one letter, tilted his head, and asked, "What's it mean?" "Grandpa?" The letter read, "I'm not a hero. I just did what others were too afraid to do. Tell the truth." I knelt beside him. It means being brave doesn't always mean fighting. Sometimes it just means not lying. He thought for a moment, then nodded. "I want to be brave too." That night, the mayor of Seattle gave a speech in front of the wall. She awarded me a Medal of Civic Honor. I didn't want it, but I accepted it for everyone the wall stood for. Then she surprised me. Staff Sergeant William Carter. She said, "We've received confirmation from the Department of Veterans Affairs. Effective immediately, the Wall of Truth will become a national traveling exhibit funded and supported by Congress." Cheers erupted. Monroe smiled beside me. "You did it, brother." "No," I said. "We did." A few days later, I returned home to my quiet little house. But it didn't feel so lonely anymore. The mailbox had been freshly painted. There was a flagpole planted upright again with a new flag fluttering proudly. A small sign had been posted in my yard, "Home of the soldier who spoke for the silenced." I stood in the doorway, hands in my pockets, letting the wind wash over me. Then I heard it, the chirp of a bird on the windowsill, a mockingbird, the same one that used to visit years ago. It sang like it was welcoming me home. Inside, I placed one final letter into the wall's archive folder, a letter I wrote just for me, and for the boys who never made it back. Dear brothers. Today, I saw my grandson smile. I saw a child understand the cost of silence. I saw truth ripple through this broken country like a flag in the wind. And I want you to know you weren't forgotten. You weren't invisible. You were the reason I stood up when the world told me to sit down. And now they know your names. They know your story. And I will keep telling it until the day I see you again. With love, Staff Sergeant Bill Carter, United States Army retired, but never silent. The sun dipped behind the trees. I poured myself a small glass of bourbon, sat in my old rocking chair, and exhaled. Not with pain, not with grief, but with peace, real hard-earned peace. And as the stars came out, I whispered to the sky, "This is home. This is honor. This is enough." In the end, justice wasn't a courtroom verdict. It wasn't a medal or a televised apology. Justice was truth spoken without fear, honor reclaimed without permission, and a life once discarded lived with purpose again. This story isn't just about me. It's about every voice they tried to silence, every soldier they buried under lies, and every family still waiting for answers. It's not about how many battles you win. It's about what you're willing to stand for when the war is over. It's about choosing courage even when the uniform comes off, and knowing that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is speak. Now it's your turn. Have you, or someone you know, been silenced, forgotten, or overlooked after service? Tell us your story in the comments. Let the world hear what others tried to bury. If this story touched you, smash that like button to support more stories like it. And subscribe to our channel to never miss another real, raw, and powerful story of truth and redemption. Because sometimes it only takes one voice to bring the truth marching home.